December 11, 1978, 3:12 a.m., JFK Airport. 6 men walked into Lufthansa Cargo Building 261 and left with $6.6 million in cash and jewelry. It was the largest cash robbery in American history at the time. The papers called it brilliant. By the summer of 1979, 11 men connected to that job were dead, shot in cars, strangled in basements, buried in shallow ground. James "Jimmy the Gent" Burke planned the heist. The government proved the theft. They never proved the murders. The robbery made headlines. The bodies were the real cleanup. This wasn't chaos. It was business. Subscribe for the full story. The enterprise behind the score. Long before the night of December 11, 1978, the robbery had roots in a functioning criminal system. Jimmy Burke operated out of Robert's Lounge in Ozone Park, Queens, where hijacking crews tied to the Lucchese crime family targeted cargo moving through John F. Kennedy International Airport and regional trucking routes. This was not street chaos. It was logistics. Trucks were followed, drivers intimidated, goods redirected into storefronts and warehouses that blended into the legitimate economy. The Lufthansa heist represented an escalation. According to Encyclopedia Britannica, approximately $5 million in cash and $875,000 in jewelry were ultimately taken from Lufthansa's cargo facility, making it at the time the largest cash robbery in American history. That scale was not accidental. It reflected reconnaissance, hierarchy approval, and calculated risk. Inside the Lucchese structure, large scores reinforced standing. Earnings flowed upward before filtering down. A robbery of this magnitude strengthened influence within the family's internal economy. Burke was not acting impulsively. He was consolidating leverage. The airport itself functioned like a commercial artery. International currency moved through Building 261 in predictable cycles, temporarily warehoused before bank transfers. In business terms, this was a concentration point. High value, limited guard presence, stable procedures. Criminal enterprises seek vulnerabilities in structured systems. Lufthansa presented one. The film Goodfellas compresses this world into a few minutes of cinematic triumph. The reality was different. The heist emerged from years of smaller operations that refined discipline and trust. It was not a gamble. It was a scaling maneuver within an already profitable criminal supply chain. Inside man, inside system. At the center of the plan was Louis Werner, a Lufthansa cargo supervisor drowning in gambling debt. By the late 1970s, Werner reportedly owed tens of thousands of dollars to bookmakers connected to organized crime. His position gave him something more valuable than cash: access. He understood shift rotations, alarm protocols, and where high-value currency shipments were temporarily stored before transfer to banks. Lufthansa's cargo building operated like a private industrial hub within public infrastructure. International currency exchanges from West Germany and elsewhere moved through the facility with minimal publicity. Only a few employees knew when vaults held unusually large reserves. Werner was one of them. His information did not pass directly to Burke at first. It moved through intermediaries linked to the Robert's Lounge circle, insulating the higher ranks. This buffering is what made the operation viable. Insider penetration reduced uncertainty. They knew how many guards were on duty. They knew which door to use. They knew when the skeleton crew window began. The robbery succeeded because it was not an external assault. It was an internal compromise. A semi-corporate transportation system, built on timetables, labor discipline, and international finance, was quietly mapped from within. Werner did not carry a gun that night. He carried schedules. And in organized crime, information is often more valuable than force. Anatomy of the operation. The Lufthansa robbery was not improvised. It was measured and rehearsed. In the weeks before December 11, 1978, the crew studied the nightly rhythm of Building 261 at John F. Kennedy International Airport in Queens. They identified the skeleton crew window, tracked guard rotations, and calculated how long they could move without triggering a rapid response. Timing controlled everything. One critical step was disabling the alarm system. Telephone lines connected to the building's alarm circuit were cut at an exterior junction, preventing alerts from reaching authorities. That required prior inspection and confidence in the layout. It was reconnaissance, not luck. The vehicles and escape routes were chosen with the same discipline. A black Ford Econoline van offered capacity and anonymity among airport traffic. The drive from JFK to Canarsie, Brooklyn was rehearsed. Safe locations were secured in advance. Inside the building, each man had a defined task: Contain staff, secure guards, access the vault. Burke's instructions were direct. No lingering, no excess force, no improvisation. The extraction lasted roughly 64 minutes. In operational terms, exposure equals vulnerability. The shorter the window, the lower the risk. What appears on film as chaotic energy was, in reality, structured logistics. The robbery unfolded like a controlled audit, carried out under threat, planned, contained, and executed with precision. Details matter. That is where the real story lives. The money and the mechanism. When the vault was opened, the scale of the operation became clear. Approximately $5 million in cash, primarily U.S. currency collected from West German exchange banks, sat bundled and sealed. An additional $875,000 in jewelry lay secured in separate compartments. Adjusted for inflation, the total would equate to well over $25 million today. The crew had reportedly expected far less. The magnitude changed the internal economics immediately. In organized crime, distribution is governed by hierarchy. Shares flow upward to the family leadership before settling among crew members. A large score increases reward, but it also amplifies paranoia. Every participant becomes a liability. Cash of that volume cannot be deposited openly. It moves in fragments. Portions are circulated through bookmakers, bars, construction fronts, and cash-heavy retail businesses. Smaller amounts are filtered into loan-sharking operations, recycling criminal proceeds into interest-bearing income. Jewelry can be dismantled, stones separated from settings, sold in pieces to avoid detection. Burke personally oversaw the counting and temporary storage of the money in Brooklyn. Division was delayed. Participants were promised future payouts rather than immediate equal shares. That decision shifted leverage toward leadership. Large criminal windfalls do not simply disappear. They are absorbed. The heist injected liquidity into an ecosystem already built on cash hijacking rings, gambling operations, protection payments. Some funds strengthened the Lucchese family's position. Some likely traveled through quieter channels that were never documented. The robbery was an extraction. The real operation was integration, moving stolen capital into structures designed to make it ordinary. The van, the fingerprints, the liability. The plan began to unravel not inside the vault, but on a quiet Brooklyn street. The black Ford Econoline van used in the robbery was supposed to disappear immediately after the crew regrouped in Canarsie. Instead, it was left parked in plain sight in East New York. Inside were fingerprints, coffee cups, and fibers. Small traces that gave investigators something tangible to work with. The task of disposing of the vehicle had reportedly been assigned to Parnell Stacks Edwards. He did not follow through. Whether because of drugs, distraction, or simple negligence, the van remained where police could find it within days. For Burke, this was not a minor mistake. It was exposure. Operational discipline is the spine of any organized enterprise, legal or illegal. Once discipline breaks, risk spreads. Each fingerprint inside that van represented leverage for federal investigators. Each crew member who talked too freely, spent too visibly, or ignored standing orders became a potential entry point into the Lucchese hierarchy. Burke understood the structure above him. He was an earner, not a boss. If law enforcement pressure climbed high enough, the family could insulate itself by isolating him. That meant the only shield he truly controlled was silence within his own circle. The abandoned van turned a completed robbery into an unstable liability. From that point forward, the question inside Burke's crew was no longer how much they would earn. It was who might compromise the enterprise first. Liquidation, as risk management. What followed in the months after December 1978 was not a burst of chaos. It was a sequence. Individuals connected to the heist began disappearing. Some found shot, others never located at all. The pattern appeared brutal. It was also calculated. Parnell Edwards was killed shortly after the van was traced back to him. Martin Krugman vanished in January 1979 and was never seen again. Louis Kafora and his wife Joanna were found murdered, their bodies hidden in a car trunk. Others connected to the operation met similar ends. Over time, at least 10 or 11 people tied to the robbery would be dead. Spending was one trigger. A new Cadillac, a fur coat, public celebration. These actions signaled instability. Visibility attracts attention. Attention invites subpoenas. Burke reportedly issued clear instructions: no flashy purchases, no unnecessary talk, no deviation from routine. Violating those terms converted associates into risks. The logic was stark. Every eliminated participant meant one fewer potential witness, one fewer pressure point for prosecutors building a conspiracy case. This was not random violence meant to shock. It was containment, removing variables before they could cooperate. At the same time, federal authorities were sharpening tools under the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO. Informants had begun reshaping organized crime prosecutions in New York. Burke's response fit the climate. Silence had to be enforced internally before the state could exploit fracture. The killings did not grow the enterprise. They preserved it. For a time, that preservation worked. Commission politics and federal pressure. The Lufthansa robbery did not exist in a vacuum. New York's 5 families operated within a delicate balance overseen by the Commission, an informal governing body that mediated disputes and protected shared interests. Lodge operations required awareness, sometimes explicit approval, especially when profits touched multiple territories. Paolo Licastri, a Sicilian-born associate linked to the Gambino family, was reportedly present around the planning stages to ensure that Gambino interests were protected. In 1979, Licastri was found murdered in Brooklyn. The killing was widely understood as internal containment, but it carried political consequences. Eliminating someone with ties to another powerful family was not a small act. It signaled that control of the Lufthansa proceeds and silence surrounding it would not be negotiated. At the same time, federal scrutiny intensified. The late 1970s marked a shift in organized crime prosecutions. The Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, passed in 1970, was being refined into a formidable instrument. Instead of charging isolated crimes, prosecutors targeted entire enterprises, linking bosses, captains, and earners in single conspiracy frameworks. The Lufthansa investigation became part of a broader federal strategy to map financial flows and communication networks within Cosa Nostra. Surveillance expanded. Informants were cultivated aggressively. The calculus changed from proving a single robbery to dismantling criminal structures. The heist had delivered record cash. It also delivered visibility. Inside Cosa Nostra, reputation rose. Outside, so did federal focus. The robbery shifted internal power balances and accelerated the federal government's appetite for enterprise-level prosecutions. It was no longer just about stolen money. It was about institutional survival. 36 years of silence. In May 1980, Henry Hill began cooperating with federal authorities after narcotics charges threatened a lengthy sentence. His testimony would later contribute to cases that weakened the Lucchese family. Yet he was not inside Lufthansa's vault. His knowledge of the robbery came from conversations within the circle. Jimmy Burke himself was convicted in 1982 for the murder of Richard Eaton and sentenced to prison, where he died in 1996. He was never convicted for orchestrating the Lufthansa robbery. For decades, the case lingered unresolved at its core. On January 23, 2014, federal prosecutors announced charges against Vincent Asaro, a Bonanno crime family captain accused of participating in the robbery. PBS NewsHour reported that the indictment relied heavily on testimony from cooperating witnesses decades after the crime. At trial in Brooklyn in 2015, defense attorneys attacked the credibility of informants. The jury ultimately acquitted Asaro on the Lufthansa-related charges. Louis Werner, the insider whose information launched the robbery, had already been convicted in 1979 and sentenced to federal prison. His case remains the only direct conviction tied specifically to the heist itself. For 36 years, investigators compiled interviews, plea deals, and fragments of testimony. They understood the architecture of the crime. Converting that understanding into courtroom proof proved far more difficult. The robbery became part of American criminal folklore, documented, dramatized, analyzed, yet legally unresolved at its center. The bottom line: what Goodfellas left out. When Goodfellas was released in 1990, Martin Scorsese told the story through Henry Hill's eyes. Hill was never inside Lufthansa Building 261 at 3:12 a.m. on December 11, 1978. He heard about it later. The film reflects that distance. The robbery becomes a flash of triumph, followed by a montage of bodies set to music. It works cinematically. It compresses years into minutes. It gives the audience motion and closure. The real story offered neither. The actual aftermath stretched across months of calculated eliminations, internal politics, and federal pressure. It was less spectacle, more arithmetic. Every killing reduced exposure. Every disappearance protected revenue. The robbery was not just a dramatic rise before a drug-fueled collapse. It was a study in criminal capitalism, how risk is measured, how liability is removed, how money moves from vault to street without ever becoming visible. No one was ever convicted for orchestrating the heist itself. The enterprise absorbed the shock. Individuals went to prison or to graves. The structure endured. If you're interested in what really happened beyond the movie version, make sure you're here for the next one.